All right, thanks for joining everybody. Hopefully you've had a great JNUC, and this is the last session of the conference, so thanks for attending. Yeah, a little round of applause for yourself and for our speakers today. Today we have Justin Wilke, Principal Enterprise Architect at Jamf, and Eric Skinner, Product Manager at Jamf. And today they're going to be presenting on empowering customer trust and compliance, the value of bringing your own encryption key, BYOK. And if you want to check out later, in the JNUC app, they do have resources available under the session, so feel free to download that. But I know Eric, I think, mentioned can provide that at a later time as well. There will be time for Q&A, so I'll be coming around with a mic just so it picks up for the recording, but I'll hand it off to you two.
Great,
Thanks.
Let's talk about the value of bringing your own encryption keys. So imagine you're renting a storage unit. You sign the contract, you move in with all your belongings and stuff. The owner of the storage unit says, here's a padlock. We'll each have a key, so we can both get in and out when we need to. You might say, thanks, but I'd actually prefer to bring my own lock and give you a key. As a renter, I want to ensure that I'm the only one entering, and while I might trust you individually, I don't know who else has a copy of that key or access to it. Hi, I'm Eric Skinner.
I'm Justin Wilke.
We're here to talk with you about the value of bringing your own encryption keys. When you're working with a third party, Jamf or otherwise, you have to take some necessary risk. And while I might ruffle some feathers with security folks to say the only way to have zero risk is to never do anything with software. But because this isn't practical, sometimes you have to weigh the options of risk versus reward. That said, working with third parties does raise that ability for bad actors, breaches, and the lack of immediate control when you're trying to resolve those sorts of tricky issues, forcing you to rely on that and work with that third party to resolve them. To help our customers with these challenges, we want to introduce one of Jamf's newest features, bring your own encryption keys. While it might not be a perfect analogy, the storage unit scenario mirrors how BYOK benefits customers at Jamf. In this analogy, Jamf is the storage unit owner, and the organization working with Jamf would be the renter. You might want to use Jamf to manage and secure your devices, but you might prefer to have control over who has keys and access to that data. Again, it's not necessarily due to distrusting Jamf, but it's a vulnerability that happens when you're working with any third party. With our modern tech landscape being littered with data breaches, regulatory pressures, and privacy concerns, giving customers a tool like this, Jamf provides that ability to strengthen the trust. So for security and high compliance-minded IT people, bring your own keys gives customers an enhanced and customizable security. And while most every third-party vendor you're going to work with offers some sort of level of encryption, with BYOK, you're in the driver's seat. We empower customers as the sole custodian of that data encryption key. You have the ability to rotate or revoke that access at any point in time. And BYOK limits access to the minimum required threshold. The only times that Jamf would have any interaction with your encryption key is when we're doing active business logic on your data and on your instance. So, is this just about Jamf's implementation of BYOK? Yes and no. For the purposes of our presentation, we're going to be talking a lot about how Jamf is doing BYOK, but the pattern isn't unique to Jamf. Plenty of other organizations can do this, and there's still a lot of value in learning about what is BYOK, what are some of the best security practices out there. So this morning, we're going to talk by defining some terms, make sure we all have a baseline understanding. Like Melody mentioned, they're in the resource center. If you want like a quick guide, we have some charts there as well. We're going to talk about the value of BYOK in the context of our current landscape, tech landscape. We're going to share how it works, talk to some use cases, and drive some parallels between existing security practices that you are already familiar with, and flash up a chance where you can learn some more. Following that, we'll open it up for Q&A. So let's define the terms. Again, like I mentioned, they're in the handout if you want to find that later. Bring your own keys, or BYOK, is a security strategy where the customer's organization generates and manages their own encryption key in a cloud environment. There are some basic requirements of BYOK before we can call it BYOK. You, as the organization, need to retain ownership and control of that key. It's encrypted on a per-tenant basis, not shared. You can monitor who has accessed and viewed and worked with that key. And lastly, you can rotate or revoke that key on demand. While Jamf has decided to refer to this as BYOK, there are some other terms for the same pattern. Hold your own key, bring your own encryption key, stuff like that. But again, for the purpose of this presentation and at Jamf, we're going to call it BYOK, even though it's the same thing. Another important term is a KMS, or key management system. This is basically where your keys are living in the cloud, how you store them, rotate, and manage them. Your big 3 cloud providers are going to have this option. We also have a 4th one we can talk about, Thales. I believe Thales or Talos, to serve as KMS. Let's talk about keys. The data encryption key, or the DEC, is the key that encrypts your data in storage. Some people call this the primary or master key, but again, it's basically just the thing that is actually encrypting your data. We also have a key encryption key that basically encrypts that DEC as a wrapper. And with that, I'll pass it over to Justin.
Thanks, Eric. So, you got the clicker?
Yeah.
So I shared this quote because I think it does a great job of summarizing BYOK. It says, even with network access and server access, attackers and insiders can't see the data unless it's authorized by the application. So if you get like a breach and someone's like looking through the database, like they're not gonna be able to access or see your data because it's gonna be encrypted with your key. The next thing I want to talk about is typical encryption provides a good handful of advantages, but also does have some limitations. So you'll always see on like a checklist, encryption in transit, encryption at rest. So Jamf does all of these things today already. So we encrypt in transit, but when it gets to the server side, it might not be encrypted, it might be in plain text. Encryption at rest at the disk level prevents, like if someone broke into AWS and stole the disk, like the storage would be encrypted, but it doesn't prevent, let's say, a sysadmin at Jamf who has credentials to select star from a table and read your data. And we also have application level encryption, which is what we're doing with BYOK, and Jamf does this today, but it's with a Jamf managed key. So it prevents unauthorized database storage access, like the select star from DBA, like it would be encrypted bytes, but that DBA may also have access to the Jamf managed key. So what we're doing with BYOK is protecting against that. So more and more every year, protecting the data is critical, and while we're not intending to drive fear and pressure, is why you should adapt something like BYOK. We do believe it's important to be an informed consumer, understand a few common ways breaches happen and how often. So 31% of breaches are like from phishing and compromised credentials. So an example might be someone steals your credentials via malware in a browser. 11% are from cloud misconfiguration, leaving an S3 bucket public. I've actually done that in a dev environment and got yelled at by InfoSec. So it's easy to do. And the third one is like software vulnerabilities. So an example of this might be if your load balancer has a vulnerability and someone gets your network traffic or something like that. So there's some examples, but all the security breaches we see today. With some of the ways security breaches happen in mind, we wanted to review some of the trade-offs between customer and vendor-held keys. Also wanted to compare alongside disk level and app level encryption. So we kind of got a chart here, and where we are today with Jamf is we're doing application level encryption with a vendor held key. And what we want to do is move to the upper right hand and do application level encryption with a customer managed key. So the way it is today with the vendor managed keys are they're stored in our infrastructure, in Jamf's infrastructure. We technically have access to decrypt your data. You are subject to our security policies. So if we rotate our encryption key after X days and you need to be Y days, that's a gap that we have today. Again, vulnerable to insider threats. Jamf has access to all of that. And we have to comply with legal requirements in our jurisdiction. So if the US government subpoenaed the data, we would have to hand it over. We'd probably have to hand the encryption key over, things like that. With the customer managed key, the keys remain in your cloud provider. If you're Azure, Google, AWS, the key stays there, never leaves your environment. You control the access policies to that. So if you're moving on from Jamf or whatever customer you had, or who you're working with, you can just remove the access to that key and it's done. You're protected from vendor insiders like Jamf sysadmins, DBAs who do not have access to the encryption key. And you control things like key size, rotation policy, encryption algorithms. That's all a choice that you as a customer get to make. So we're going to get through how Jamf's implemented BYOK, and we're going to walk through some sequence diagrams. These are Jamf specific, but the pattern isn't really Jamf exclusive. Other BYOK implementations have similarities. So it's an envelope wrapping architecture. Again, we talked about the master key will never leave your customer environment. Eric talked some of the acronyms about data encryption key that wraps and encrypts. We have a concept called a leased key, where that will be cached for up to 5 minutes, so we're not hitting your KMS live every time. We can do that if you want. We can do live lookups against your KMS, but that does come at the cost of how often we would be hitting it, and you as a customer would take on those cloud costs. And then yeah, we're encrypted with the data encryption key and store that securely. So how does it all work? Kind of got some flow charts here. We'll have a Jamf product. So today it's going to be in Jamf Pro is kind of where we're starting with BYOK. And then, so in this flow, we would want to encrypt data, like let's say a VPP token. And so we would go to our BYOK service. We would generate a data encryption key. And I should note this is like at least like where we cache the key. And so we would look it up, and we would get the key, and then we would wrap it. And then we would return the encrypted data to the data layer, and that would be written to disk, encrypted. And you can notice there's no hop to your KMS in this flow. So now that we cover the cache hit, we'll just talk about what happens the first time when there's a cache miss. We go to what we're calling our config service, and that's where you're going to give, like an AWS example might be the ARN of your KMS key and how the information on how we would authenticate to get that key. So we would get that, and then we would go to your KMS and wrap the lease key, and then we would store that. We would cache it for the next time around, and then we would continue with the rest of the flow that we have here, where the encrypted data goes back to the application and gets written. So that was the encrypt flow. The decryption is very similar. We go to the BYOK service. This is the cache hit, so there's no hit to your KMS. And we're able to do the encryption or the decryption flow and return decrypted data, and that might be like an API call or a UI. So only the Jamf application is authorized to decrypt and encrypt that data. And again, here's the where we actually are hitting the KMS. Similar to the encryption flow. Yep, here's the full flow. So with a sequence aside, let's talk more about the features. Like Aaron mentioned, we have multi-cloud support, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and Thales CipherTrust. Customer has control, this is the big one, customer has control over the key. So they can choose encryption algorithms, key sizes, rotation policies, control, access policies. That's all in your hands. And with BYOK, customers also get complete visibility. So we'll have a SIEM integration where you can get events sent to your Splunk instance, or is it Google SecOps, I think is what they're calling it now. So your security teams get real-time access to when your key is being accessed and what operations we're doing on it. They can do any sort of anomaly detection or compliance reporting that they need to with that data. So just want to walk through what BYOK looks like at Jamf. Here, this would be something that you would have in your environment. This is just a CloudFormation template of a KMS key with the permissions. Again, you control all of this. So just like that's where you start. You need a KMS key before you come to Jamf. And then you will get an email invitation from Jamf to start setting up your configuration. And so again, we've got the cloud providers there where you would add a config, and we would need an access key and a secret to be able to access the key, and then the region as well. So here you can see we have a key set up in US East 1. This is a AWS specific example. And then here's the config assignment where we're actually going to turn on key leasing on this, so we're not hitting the KMS every time and making our company bankrupt for all the calls to KMS. And here is the login configuration. So this is where you configure your Splunk instance and say that I want to know when Jamf is decrypting and encrypting my data. And that you would probably have to pair with your security organization to get the token and the domain and stuff for your SIEM. And this is just what it would look like in the UI. And then just internally to the Jamf Pro database, this is how we are going to store the encrypted data, as well as the EDEC, which is needed to decrypt the data later. Important to note here, any Jamf insider who queries this data, it will be unreadable, and they will not be authorized to access your KMS key. Only the Jamf Pro application is authorized. So you can see in the service token here, this is the VPP example, we have the encrypted bytes. And you can kind of see on the left-hand side there's the EDEC. That's also needed to decrypt that value. But this, like if a Jamf Pro DBA that had access to everything, this is what they would see. They wouldn't be able to decrypt that. And then again, this is Jamf Pro looks like it always did. It's behind the scenes. Today it's encrypted with a Jamf managed key, so we will rekey your data to decrypt it with the Jamf managed key, encrypt it with your key, and then write it to the database, and the application will just work like it always did. Here's an example of some of the SIEM events that go to your Splunk instance. So it says, the data was decrypted with the EDEC using a Lease key. So those will just continue to flow to your SIEM. I'm going to hand it back to Eric.
Cool. So why should you care about BYOK? What's the business value? Yeah, we walked through it. We can see it. What does it do, though? According to IBM, the cost of an average data breach in 2025 is $4.4 million. So let's give some scale. It's almost 3,000 JNUC tickets, about 51 years of a sysadmin salary. Because we're in Denver, about 300,000 breakfast burritos. And most importantly, it's about 80 years of BYOK, roughly speaking, pricing TBD. So strictly from an ROI perspective, even if it stops one breach during your lifetime, it's already paid for. Let's talk about some use cases and comparisons. This is going to start to get out there a little bit, but when I go to a store like Costco and get the Kirkland brand item, I love what it shows, what it compares to, or even better, what's the brand behind it. Sure, I know that pink pill is an allergy med, diphenhydramine, but most people know it as Benadryl. It's the same pill, it's the same practice, whatever. So what I wanted to do is provide some similar comparisons that lean on that. Because the patterns in BYOK lean on some of those best practices and security that you're already aware of, you might just not know it in this context. But I also know that people have better memory recall when we talk about things in creative ways. This is why you have Roy G. Biv for the rainbow colors that sticks in your memory. You know it. So some of my examples are going to be a little weird and out there, but one of my coaches used to say, if it's stupid, but it works, then it's not stupid. So key rotation, rekeying rotation. The memory aid here is being Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football. Lucy's always pulling the rug out. BYOK allows you to pull that rug out and revoke the key at a moment's notice. You might use this in the event of a security breach, whether that be actual or suspected, in a similar way that you might rotate your password if you got an email notifying you about a data breach. Next up, to be crystal clear, key rotation and revocation do have some implications. I'm going to simplify some of them here, but catch me after if you want to talk more about them. Key rotation issues a new key, like adding a new lock or a key to a door. It has some minor considerations with timing and sequencing and making sure you get that right, but overall it's a good best practice. Apparently I got off my clicks, but rekeying should be done carefully and intentionally. It's a little bit more impactful where you're getting a new key, re-encrypting your data, and then disbanding with the old one. Again, considerations with timing here. Key revocation is much, much more incendiary. This is the mutually assured destruction option. Data will be fully encrypted and bricked for you and whomever else has that access. So you can do it, but know what you're getting into. BYOK also affords you better data retention and protection. Our memory aid here is being leave no trace, just like you might do when you're camping in the wilderness. With BYOK, if and when you end a relationship with a vendor, like Jamf or otherwise, your data comes with you. Because the vendor doesn't have that encryption key, all they're left with is that hash value, the gobbledygook, the encrypted output. Sure, you could trust the vendor to delete or purge the database or delete the instance after you leave, but just like you might shred your sensitive documents before you throw them away. Next, we have the security and compliance requirements that BYOK provides. This is your diploma, your certification. Some industries have harder requirements around data retention. Governments, R&D, highly regulated industries like bank, fintech have certain requirements that they must meet. And just like your diploma, your SOC 2 compliance, there's thousands of certifications you have, but it means you have a baseline foundation and you are speaking the same language as somebody else for your certification. On-premise security, but in the cloud, this is also a really, really keystone benefit in my opinion, especially as it relates to Jamf. This is how Google Workspace Admin works. If you're not familiar with that, just kind of roll with me. With on-prem, you get an incredible amount of control over your data, who has visibility, who has access to it, but you're also on the hook for the maintenance and the upkeep that comes with that. With BYOK, you're getting some of those same advantages that you get with like a cloud storage provider. Again, analogies here. But like with Google Workspace Admin, you get visibility in who's shared those documents, who's viewed those documents, who has accessed that key and when. BYOK also gives you enhanced data sovereignty and privacy. Justin kind of touched on this. Our memory aid here is that like 90s style screen protector, although I've seen a couple around more often. I sat next to a guy on the plane who had one, which I was surprised by. Use case here is if there's a government, like Justin said, where the data resides, but you have a key in a different country, for example, short of breaking that encryption algorithm, that government can't access your data. There's no way. Just like if you had a phone that was encrypted with your locked PIN, law enforcement can't get that data. So, as I mentioned at the top, I'm not your account exec, I'm not a salesperson. As a product manager, my job is to help make Jamf products better for our admins and our customers. If you liked what you learned about BYOK, and that's where it ends, great, thanks for coming, happy to have you here. If you liked what you saw today and want to learn more about BYOK, we got some great news. You can sign up for our select private beta. As a beta customer, there are some requirements. We would want you to be able to provide feedback with product managers and collaborate to help us make BYOK better. You also need to have a test instance, so you're not immediately running on this on prod, please. You'll need to also have a KMS, like we talked about before, and provide the ability to interact with that. We're going to have that URL in just a minute, but if you also want to talk shop, feel free to find me in the Mac admin Slack. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I think that's, as Melody mentioned in the session notes, but I'm happy to talk with you about that, figure out how we can help you out. So, what did we learn today? We've learned that BYOK gives customers a personalized method of encryption and auditing beyond what's provided out of the box, excuse me. We've learned that BYOK customers are in the driver's seat. They can rotate their keys, revoke it whenever they want. Again, so long as you're doing so intentionally, please. We've also learned the leave no trace principle. So with BYOK, if you ever leave a product or organization, it's like you were never there. Your sensitive data is fully encrypted. No worries about your data being left behind. BYOK is currently specific to our Jamf for Mac offering by way of Jamf Pro, but we're always looking for new ways for admins and organizations to get these new experiences. It is a cloud add-on feature, but because it's an add-on, there aren't any hard requirements like premium cloud only, so we are trying to figure this out. I know that's a big thing for some people. Clicks. And before we hop into Q&A, I have an incentive up here. You can get a BYOK session exclusive. It's a keychain, it's a zipper pull, it's a water bottle tag, or any other creative uses that you have for it. And if you didn't know, it's the dad joke. Yes, it's a keychain, but you have to bring your own keys. Some citations, which I'll also have a link to. And with that, I think we're open for Q&A. Question here.
Can you talk a little bit about the process for rotating a key? When the data is re-encrypted, is that happening during the startup of the application, or is it something that's going on in the background?
Yeah, so the first time when we do the rekey from the Jamf managed key to the customer managed key, there will be, during the startup process, that's when it happens. But the rotation policy, like let's say 3 months after that, you go on AWS and rotate your key, it just handles it. So yeah, you don't have to do any rekeying. So the EDEC that we store in the database, that is submitted in the request to do the decryption. And does that answer your question?
Yes, and I was also just going to ask, have you tested it with very large databases?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Have you tested this with very large databases, like the initial encryption? How does that?
We are currently looking in private beta. We've tested it with some performance hits to try and make sure, like, hey, is it robust enough? But that's why we're going into private beta. We want to see. We have the engine powering it. We have seen successful in other instances in use.
Yeah.
But we want to get that private beta feedback to make sure, hey, is this going to tank you? And what do we need to do to make it better?
Yeah. Maybe another important note too is we're not encrypting everything in the database.
Yeah.
So the fields that are already encrypted in Jamf, it's the same. So it's pretty much the same CPU, or like there's no new processing happening. There's the one-time rekey when you switch from Jamf managed to your customer controlled key. But there shouldn't be any like new operations going on.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Cache hit.
Yep.
What else we got?
What does our key infrastructure need to look like to utilize this feature?
What?
Like from a KMS perspective?
Yes.
You would need to have a KMS and be willing to store one there. If you wanted to, like, are you talking about like encryption methods and stuff like that?
Right. Methods, other features that we should have, if there's any protocols that we need to use, how does it need to be accessible to Jamf, like as far as any connections or firewall or other features? Or are we just bringing it to at one time?
Yeah,
I think it's just a KMS, right?
yeah, so your cloud provider will have like, if we use AWS for example, like you could have like an IAM user, and that user could have privileges to the key, and then you could rotate those credentials on your own policy as well, whatever your security risk. So you need a KMS stood up, and you need to give us a way to interact with it is kind of how simple it is. Like there's not really a ton of setup.
Yeah, I mean, your security folks would probably have thoughts and opinions about how it's implemented, which is why we have that KMS of like, however you want to manage that, that's possible.
Would it be the same kind of interaction IP at space that's already published for Jamf Cloud access?
In terms of access to the KMS,
Right.
I would think so.
What was the question?
So if, as getting access to our KMS, would Jamf be coming from the same IP space that's currently being published for Jamf hosted applications?
I would think so. Let's talk after though.
Okay.
I want to
Yeah.
make sure I am fully appreciating that question.
Yeah.
Cool. What else? No.
I know it's still beta, but are you intending to offer custom KMS configurations outside of what? Okay.
You get to set your own KMS configuration. Are you saying
What
like,
I'm saying is, if I'm not hosting it in Amazon or something to that effect, are you going to offer that, or is that something that we can work with in the background?
we could consider that, but that kind of defeats the purpose because like you want control over your KMS. So if we also say, here's a KMS that we spun up for you,
No. What I'm saying is that if I want to host my KMS in an approved cloud environment that you don't currently support, are you going to offer a custom configuration for me to use that KMS? Like, is that a possibility?
we're always open to new ideas and features of like how we can make your experience better. So I very rarely can think of, unless there are like hard reasons to be like, that's a dumb idea. Absolutely, we can totally consider stuff like that.
Great. Thanks.
Cool. What else?
So for the DEK layer, is there any one-way encryption involved, or is that all like two-way encryption?
Do you know that?
Yeah, I guess I don't think I know.
Okay, we can look it up after. I might not have to
Yeah,
answer,
yeah.
but like, let's find it. What else we got? Going once, going twice. Cool. Well, like I mentioned, I'll be lingering around here. I think we have enough keychains for everybody, even if you didn't ask a question. So feel free to grab one. Really appreciate everybody coming. And for anyone watching the recording, feel free to reach out with any questions. We're happy to help you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.